Art Online Progressive Aria of Starless Night movie is approaching its release in Japan at the very least, so why not have a look back at the original Aincrad adaptation opening that actually featured the biggest aspect of Aria of Starless Night that you certainly have missed because you probably didn't know Aria was actually a thing back then. Nothing to be ashamed of, I'll give you a secret, I didn't know about it when I first watched the anime either. Welcome everyone, it's me Gamerturk, your best source of Art Online information, and this is a Progressive Explained special featuring a blast from the past, Art Online Opening 1. Before we begin, if you're new to my Explained series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels. Well, the original opening is actually quite the generic one, as in does not have much subtle hints to specific events like the later Alicization openings had. It still features some key details, especially a very striking moment for Asuna that was never even adapted in the original anime because Aria of Starless Night was covered in episode 2 as the beater episode in the most horrific way possible simply because Reiki wrote too much for them to adapt. So technically Aria of Starless Night did properly exist in its entirety at the disposal of the anime before the adaptation, way before its eventual release as the first half of Progressive Volume 1, and portions of it were thus also included in the opening that were not included in any of the actual episodes. All in all, this is probably gonna be a mini explained, but still timestamps will be in the description for you to easily navigate the video, along with Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links so you can grab the light novels for yourselves. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth SAO coverage, and let's cast away the sly foxes spreading misinformation and get on with this Progressive Explained special. This is such a nostalgic feeling to come back to after so many years, and it's incredibly lightweight in its meaning or hints compared to the 4 or I guess 4.5 Alicization openings I covered on my channel, and let's not forget the alternative GGO opening either, which was actually my first ever explained video format. The bubbles rising up from the vast field created by code, there isn't really a meaning to derive from the source material here, but if you want to think artistically, the entire visualization kinda gives you a feeling of being drowned on seabed here, where the code lines are not a field per se, but rather the sand of the seabed, which is quite an oppressing thing from a context standpoint and certainly matches how SAO feels, you know, that feeling of being trapped under the weight of the task, but the simplicity of the visual also gives you a sense of freedom, mainly the fluidity of the code surface there, that is of course later used in countless visualizations in the series too, most memorably in the opening of Ordinal Scale, where the code lines painted Aincrad in its entirety. But again, nothing that's brought over from the novels here, it's just a cool techie animation for the title card to appear, and I can't even be sure if the artsy explanation I had was even necessary. Kirito resting next to a wall under rain, this is the shot that aims to portray Kirito's thoughtful and generally negative mental state in Aincrad, but it just became one of those shots that make it look like Kirito is the cool emo kid, especially with choices made with his voice in the English dub for that audience group. A lot of things would just be different if they did not portray him with his late game attire, but rather any of his earlier wardrobe selections, literally. The decision of course is made because this is the coolest and most recognizable outfit, you know, for marketing purposes, but I cannot help but feel sad that we could have had this shot with his starter outfit and Anneal Blade combo, showing his shock after the first day when he was almost killed by another beta tester. Wink wink, subscribe for my extensive video about the first day side story that's going public in about 2 weeks. Patrons and channel members already have access to it, so consider supporting the channel. Or, considering Aria of Starless Night was already written as a story, we could have had Anneal Blade with the coat of Midnight, which admittedly looks extremely similar to the Black Worm coat, to highlight the immense weight and pressure he shouldered after Deval's death by posing as the beater so the beta testers would not be harassed. Or, you know, we could have had the outfit from the Sachi episode to showcase his despair after that event. So many missed opportunities just to have the most recognizable iconic outfit out there at the beginning, in my opinion. Similarly, Asuna is shown with her most iconic look as well, which is not as unfitting as Kirito's case was, especially considering this outlook of hers is meant to juxtapose the one thing they have adapted from Aria of Starless Night correctly in the original series: the visual of Asuna sitting curled up on a bed in SAO and crying trying hopelessly. Everyone always goes, oh, Asuna was so cool in SAO, but her character was downgraded so much later down the line. And the reality was that her character had always been quite fragile inside, with a massive drive to bottle it all up and do whatever she could do best. And Aria of Starless Night was one of the biggest showcases of this that we never got to see in episode 2, the beater episode, because it was just so Kirito-centric. I will of course remain very surface level, of course, because you'll see the actual meat of it in the progressive movie. We do know these scenes are going to be there despite the changes and additions, because we have already seen relevant scenes, heard relevant lines of this despair, etc. And this shot alone portrays Asuna better than any of her appearances in Aincrad anime, solely because it showcases her completely broken state. And we know for a fact this image is from Aincrad, not from real life, thanks to the prism bed light. You can find it in pretty much every shot in an inn with a light source, although for some reason it's never a bed light in the Sachi episode, where I hoped I would find it the easiest for a screenshot. They used the standing light instead, which is also a triangle, but still, for an exact match, I'm using this far shot instead, since I'm too lazy to go through 14 other episodes just for a single lamp illustration to prove my point. But going back to the main topic, this is basically how Asuna feels, especially in the first 3 weeks of Aincrad. And this is also a perfect juxtaposition that illustrates another thing you have also heard in progressive movie trailers, so I have no issues highlighting it here either. It's a great showcase of her always trying to conform to the expectations of others despite how she truly feels, something never properly shown in the anime until Mother's Rosario, at which point the Asuna's character has been destroyed train was already gone too far for people to even understand what's happening. The thing is, Asuna never wanted to be the Flash. She never wanted to be the vice commander of the Knights of Blood, the most successful guild in the late game. But Asuna has a personality that leads her to stepping up to the task at hand, not because it's truly what she wants on a personal level, but because she feels the responsibility to, due to a variety of reasons, whether it's because she knows it's the right thing to do, or because she knows it's something nobody else will do otherwise, etc, etc. She lived her life conforming to the expectations of others, and while her eyes are open to a different reality for a while, thanks to a specific event you will see in the Aria movie, specifically its final scene, eventually Asuna and Kirito break up on floor 25, and Asuna once again gets buried under the weight of responsibilities, as well as past regrets, leading to the portrayal of Asuna in the anime, the quote-unquote cool Asuna that you saw on the surface level. In all honesty, I can't even decide whether this shot existing in the original opening is a blessing because such an incredible character personality detail was included in the opening, or whether it's just a slap in the face because none of it was even in the actual anime. Tied to the things never shown in the anime but included in the opening, it was certainly an interesting choice to use the mirroring shot to feature Asuna too. It's not like the Aincrad anime ever makes a mention of Asuna's real life, certainly not episode 2, that's adapted from Aria of Starless Night, but again, it is included here because it is still part of the Aria of Starless Night content. While it is part of the handful of pages of Asuna background information early on in the story, it does talk about some real life details of Asuna, how her life had been meticulously planned by her parents and how she threw all of that away by trying out her brother's nerve gear. And not only does this mirror shot do a great job at portraying the two sides Asuna has that we just talked about, but it also works great as a trapped in the mirror case, showcasing how she is trapped away from her real life, which is of course the basic takeaway anyways that many of you probably understood as well. The reaching for the sky shot is quite a typical shot, the typical showcase of feeling suppressed or isolated, as well as trying to reach for freedom, let's say, that suddenly gets turned upside down with the system warning signs appearing with the characters actually getting trapped. The hands of course belong to Kirito as well as Asuna, however see that it's only the two Kirito shots that reach out to the sky of Aincrad, highlighting how Kirito is effectively reaching out to the VR world of Art Online to feel that sense of freedom, whereas Asuna is visible with her real life clothes reaching out to a jumbled digital surrounding. Again, going back to those Aria of Starless Night references that the anime basically only incorporated into the opening sequence without adapting a single thing in the actual anime, Asuna is basically feeling stuck in a corner in the real world, and how that eventually led to her having a peek into this new craze that is full dive, which eventually led to her getting trapped in it. But yeah, that's actually pretty much it. The rest is completely rudimentary in my opinion, but we'll still talk about them of course. The teleport gate plaza turning into a black hole, cementing the fate of all the players players into Aincrad, Kirito on floor 74 rushing through mobs, which is appropriate considering the first actual story of Art Online basically consists of floor 74 and 75. It was obviously a great choice to have Gleam Eyes fight be the action bit of the opening. This was basically the biggest and coolest event of SAO Volume 1. It was the most iconic event of the entire Aincrad arc at that point, especially considering the cuts Aria suffered as it became the beer episode, and let's be real, Volume 2 and Volume 8 side stories featuring Sachi, Silica, Lisbeth, Murder Mystery Yui, etc. none of them have had high points like this. Asuna running up the giant sword of the Gleam Eyes that's used later as an inspiration for Alicization Core 3 opening with Alice and the Sword Golem, of course, which is cool, I guess. Basic showcases of other characters to appear in the series, and the reason I'm highlighting its basic nature here is because we actually do get to see the evolution of such teasing character scenes in an opening, with Alicization Opening 1 actually doing the exact same thing, but in a much more fluid and natural way, showing us key characters of the story like Sortilina, Tiza, Ronya, Cardinal, etc. in more elaborate ways. Considering these are just, you know, half a second shots, you really gotta appreciate the care that's put into them and how simple they were back at the beginning of the series in comparison. I have to say, I never understood why the anime ever decided to create these floaty platforms with ruins on top of them. You see them pretty often on floor 1 too in the normal course of the anime. I guess they look cool for a fantasy setting, but let's be real, that's kind of all they do. It'll be interesting if they'll use the same concepts in Progressive Movie too, considering they are actually paying great attention to the landscapes and maps of floor 1 in the movie, so such random cool things may stand out a bit too much if they're included, but we'll see when we see the movie. But a very cool detail they have shown here is the Labyrinth Tower and the ceiling of floor 1. It will be hammered home in the upcoming movie, of course, as the title Aria of a Starless Night is literally a reference to the fact that you cannot see stars within a floor in Aincrad because there isn't actually a sky above, it's just the ceiling. The first time this was properly mentioned was in Ordinal Scale's opening scene with Kirito promising to show Asuna shooting stars in the real world as they were, you know, looking up to the shiny stone ceiling there. The only exception where you can see the actual sky in Aincrad is the edge of a floor where there's an opening and you can just glance to the outside world. In the original anime, they very rarely paid attention to this. It sometimes simply does not exist, with sky having normal blue as well as clouds, whereas in some very rare shots you can actually see the ceiling being there with the actual sky with clouds being outside of Aincrad, like this specific wolf shot in episode 1. The original anime really used its settings incredibly selectively in this aspect. They simply omitted all the details and carried on like everything was just normal when it was simply easier for them to do. I also mentioned the Labyrinth Tower because I wanted to highlight that too. You know, when they wanted to show a wide shot of Aincrad in the rare occasions that they cared for the actual architecture of Aincrad, they never really did a good job with the pillars, and I remember a lot of people simply being confused about this, so I figured this little special video was a good chance to address that too. You see, on every single floor there is only a single Labyrinth Tower that features the floor boss and the stairs to the next floor. The real hard task is to actually reach the Labyrinth Tower, as it's most usually on the complete opposite side of the floor where you enter it, or is designed to be reached through very contrived ways, as well as, you know, actually finding the boss room within, as there are numerous floors within a tower with maze-like maps that make sure the boss room is not easily reachable. You may ask, well, what are the other pillars then? And you would be correct. That is exactly what caused a lot of confusion in the early days of the anime too, leading people to think the players had to find the correct tower, which was never the case. You see, every other pillar is literally just a pillar. Aincrad is 100 floors stacked on top of each other, and if you look closely, these narrower pillars are just that, on the very edge of the floor, simply holding the entire structure of Aincrad. And I'll just direct you to Ordinal Scale once again to showcase those pillars on the edge, placed at perfectly regular intervals to simply carry the floor above. And of course, we have more side character visuals, and what you may not have realized is the reason why the 4 previous characters, Silica, Lisbeth, Sachi, and Yui, had proper backgrounds, while Agil, Klein, Kuradeel, and Heathcliff don't. It's not because these are male characters, so the anime does not care about them. Oh, okay, maybe a little bit of that, but it's actually because these 4 characters are actual side characters from Art Online Volume 1, where the story is not about them at all. Whereas Silica, Lisbeth, Sachi, and Yui, they are characters characters featured in Art Online Volume 2, where they are actually the main characters, or at the very least core characters of their respective story there. Volume 2 simply consists of 4 side stories that focus on these 4 characters and building them as characters, unlike the side characters of Volume 1 that only appear here and there as supporting cast. So there's a distinct difference between this group of characters. Anyways, moving on, Kirito and Asuna defeating the Gleam Eyes, and Kirito does not have dual blades, obviously because it was supposed to be a reveal in the story, as well as, you know, would have broken the symmetry of these cool shots. Similarly, Alicization Human Realm arc openings also never showed Kirito dual wielding, because again, that was a massive story point that they would not have shown in the opening, so same scenario here. This is followed by Asuna's home in Selmburg, and then floor 59, Danak, where Kirito was taking a nap with Asuna complaining about it and then sleeping herself too. Their outfits, of course, don't match that specific scene, but that's because it's the OP, nothing more. You can recognize the location by the windmills alone, so that checks out. And last but not least, the beginning of a series of iconic shots, starting with the Dark Repulsor and Lambent Light being stuck to the ground in a cross shape. But yeah, that's pretty much all of it. I still talked a bit more than I intended to, but I guess I had more stuff to say about Aria than I initially realized. If you made it this far, comment Starless Aincrad to let me know. If you enjoyed this special explain, please do leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more in-depth coverage of SAO. My summary video for the first day side story that acts as a prequel to Progressive is already available for patrons and channel members, and it will be publicly released in the next 2 weeks. I got more Aria of a Starless Night themed videos planned, but if you have ideas that you specifically want me to cover, I know, do share them below in the comments. I'll see what I can do. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter for the fastest news possible. SAO the first day merch, among others, are available on my spring page. A huge thanks to all my patrons and channel members as always, and until next time, stay cool.